Well, hello, everyone. This is Al-Fadi. Thank you so much, of course, for your faithfulness to follow along with us in this exciting series about Mecca, A Search for a Place. We enjoy reading your comments. We enjoy your interactions. Thank you for doing so. Keep it coming. And, we've shared enough data with you. We debunked a lot of attempts to provide a logical, historical location for Mecca that will line up with today's location. But all of these attempts by our Muslim friends have proven to be unsuccessful. And now that we have put out all of this info for you, now that we have done all of these videos so far, we get to the so what question. How can we now benefit from that? So today, and hopefully starting from today, we will start putting it all together for you and making sense of everything that we have shared with you. Once again, we turn our attention to our dear brother, Dr. J, who is with us here in studio to do so. Thank you, brother, for being with us. Thank you for all the data that you've shared and this research that I can assure you a lot of people probably wouldn't have had the time or the ability to put it all together the way you have done. And we encourage them, of course, to build upon that.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we've said that we're going to do. We're going to be those who actually communicate it, get it down, make a sense of it, and then get it out there so that the public can look at it and then respond to it. And this is what we've done with all of our shows, with all of our episodes, with all of our different series. We did this with the Qiblas. We did this certainly with the origins of Islam, and we also did it with Muhammad. Now we're looking at Mecca. This is a whole series on Mecca. We did it with Dan Gibson versus David King, that whole series. So it stands to reason that people will want us to come up to conclusions because we've put out an awful lot of problems out there. We've talked about the historical problems. We've talked about the geographical problems. We've looked at the theories that the Muslims have put there, and we've debunked all of them, the three major theories. So now the question that everybody says, well, okay, Al-Fadi, Jay, you've shown us all the problems. What then happened? And I would love to just say, well, this is what happened. I would love to be able to do that. I would love to just pull it out of a hat and say, we now know categorically, but this is history. And remember, no one has been able to really understand the 7th century because so much of it has been destroyed by the Abbasids. The Abbasids in the 8th, 9th, and 10th completely eradicated. We know of al-Bukhari destroying 98% of everything he was giving and only retaining 2%. And it's that 98% that you and I are going to have to now try to piece back together and try to make sense of it all. So I'm going to tell you, and you either can agree with or not, or those who are watching, I'm going to tell you what we believe today in June of 2021. This is where we think. This is how we think it all happened. We're going to have to change it. We're going to have to dovetail it. We're going to have to move things around. We're going to have to change the goalposts. We're going to have to correct it as new material comes to the fore. And we've always said this, haven't we? We follow where the evidence leads.
Right.
We always follow where the evidence leads. In the 7th century, we're not interested, as I said over and over again, we're not interested in, 7th century over on this side, 7th century, we're not interested in the 9th and 10th century redactions. We're getting tired of them. And I know Muslims who are going to comment, they're going to say, well, this is not what I've read, this is not what I've been told, this is not what I heard in school. Because everything they've been told, everything that they've read about how it all happened, how Mecca was created, how Mecca existed, how Muhammad lived, or where he lived, or how he received the Quran, everything they've been told is from the 9th, 10th, and 11th century, much, much too late. So let's go back to the 7th century. Let's try to put it together. Let's see what we do find. And to do that, let's ask the first question that people are asking. They say, hold on a minute, Jay. You have now said that Petra is where all the Qiblas are pointing from Dan Gibson's material. Petra is where, this is where all the 5 stages of the Hajj. But at the same time, you're saying that all the Qurans come from Hira. Hira is that city that is today called Kufa. Kufa is where 12 of the Qira'ats are formed. When you did your whole series on the Qira'at, you're saying that all the major manuscripts were put together in the north, in Syria and Iraq, and Hira is the city that was Kufa, and that's where that's where the seminaries were, and that's where much of the ideas were percolating and being put together. So, and that's where this character who was Abu Qabisa,
yeah.
Did he come from that city? That's where he was, and he was a Lakhmid king that was being used by the Sassanians. Then he turned over to the Byzantines, and then he actually rebelled from the Byzantines. Ilyas Qabisa,
Ilyas ibn Qabisa,
are you now saying that
Yeah.
It's in Iraq, or you're saying it's in Jordan? Is it in Hira, or is it in Petra? So let's answer that question first. Let's get beyond, because this is causing a lot of confusion. I've seen it on the internet. Remind ourselves that Petra Jordan versus Hira in Iraq. We're not conflicting the two. Please understand this. This is not a conflict. Look at the slide there. These are actually complementary, and they're actually sequential. That's the confusion. They don't realize that you need to follow it on a timeline. So Iraq concerns the politics, and it concerns the Quran, and it concerns the theological debates. That all comes later. Remember, that all comes later. We've said very clearly that this all begins to appear in the 8th, 9th, and 10th century. That's Iraq. However, Petra predates that. Petra in Jordan concerns really only the Qiblas, the direction of prayer, and the mosques, and I would add to that the Hajj, from what we're now just introducing now, the Hajj that predates Mecca. So Iraq both precedes Petra and then returns following Petra, because we know that the Nabateans are in Petra, but before that, we also know that the ancient history, the Assyrian period, the Babylonian period, that's all taking place in what is today Iraq. We know that from the biblical studies. So Iraq is important between 577 up to 633. When we look for the quest of Muhammad that we did earlier in our earlier episode, we talked quite a bit about Kufa. We talked quite a bit about Iraq. That exists up until 636. And then Petra becomes important from 626. Why? Because 626 is when you start to receive, you start looking at the Qiblas. The earliest Qiblas that Gibson comes up with is 626, all the way up until 727. So the next 100 years are all over in Petra, up in the north, up in the western side. Then we return back to Iraq after 627. Actually, we start with 736, because then in 736 is where we start to see the Qirats start to form. And that's the first Qirat is 736, and then that continues all the way up into 844, the mid-9th century. And then the 10th century, when you have them finally canonized, chosen by Ibn Mujahid there in 936, and then later by Shatibi, and then later by Al-Jaziri in 1429, and then finally, even later in that, in 1924, by Muhammad Qasai al-Haddad. That guy did a little less than 100 years. So you need to follow the sequence on a timeline, and that's why be careful. These do not conflict, they do not contradict, they complement, but they complement along a timeline. So that's what we're talking about. Now, let's continue. What about the place? The need for a place was already in place, therefore. So Petra has all the stations of the pilgrimage that we talked about earlier of the Hajj, which are now in Mecca. We find the square center in the Kaaba with the exact dimensions mentioned by Azraqi, which do not fit the present-day Kaaba in Mecca. We found the Safa and Marwa mountains, which commemorate Hagar looking for water, are in Petra. Those really are mountains with places for idols sitting at the top. We see churches up there on the top of those mountains. We don't find that in Mecca at all. They're just nothing more than little rocks, 15 foot high. You've seen them, you've been there. Well, the washing of the water with cisterns and waterways are also in Petra. They're not in Mecca. Mecca had no water. Even the Zamzam well, we're not even sure when that was probably dug. We're going to be getting into that. That's for yet to come. The plain of Muzdalifah, a slippery slope mountain, as far as the mountain of Ararat, with the mosque and the church, is also can be found in Petra. Easily 5,000 people could pray on it. That is not the one that we see in Mecca today. Is nothing more than a facsimile of that. The Jamarat platform, we can see the base for it. We can see the foundations for it there in Petra, where you floor either 49 or 72 rocks. That now has been increased to 3 Jamarats since the 1950s up until the 1980s. Now today, there are 3 of them. There may be even 4th and a 5th will have to be added as the crowds get larger. They just keep on adding the new traditions to support that. So let's just look at Petra, because we need to notice this. Let's look at a map here, and here's the map. I'm going to put the map up there. Notice where Petra is. There it is, right there.
Right.
Okay? The Nabatean city of tombs and temples. And that's why the tourists go there, because of all the tombs and temples that are there. It is on the trade routes east and west and north, but not south, not the land trade route. You notice it's not an trade route going south along the land, but on the trade routes on land going east and west. Why not south?
Well, that proves the sea basically trade route.
Bingo.
It stops there and it starts going from there.
To understand why it doesn't go south is because of the sea routes. And we talked about that. That's why we debunked Jeddah. The sea routes coming across here from the Arabian Sea go right up the Red Sea, and from there they go up to Petra. So it's very clear if you follow the green arrows that was all maritime. That was all maritime trade.
And the East also supports the notion that going all the way to modern-day Basra and going from there to that region.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Where do you put it up? Basra, which would be right up here.
Yeah.
So, Petra is where the Nabatean Aramaic was also spoken. Remember we talked about that, and written, which later gave birth to what is in the Quran today. The Tar Marbuta, the Alif Maksura, the definite article Al, those were all created up in the north. Petra is where all the mosques, Dan Gibson found this, all the mosques up until 706 AD were all facing Petra. And they were as far away as Canton in China and Shadaman in India. So conclusion, Petra seems to have been the original sanctuary, which was then later copied to Mecca in the 8th century by the Abbasids. Hold on a minute. We know that Petra is much too far north to support the later traditions. Support the later traditions of Mecca once again. It's too far the distance and too late. So what we're going to do next,
yes,
we're going to go then look at the 7th century. Let's then look and see what we do now know. We've seen pretty well that Petra does not conflict with Hira or Kufa or Iraq. Jordan does not conflict with Iraq. But what we do know is Mecca is missing in all of that. Mecca, we cannot find in any of that. All the trade routes go around it, all the mosques do not face it, and all the history does not support it.
Let's do that in a separate episode.
Let's do that in the next episode. Let's then talk about the 7th century. What do we know and what can we find from that scenario?
Thank you. And hopefully everyone beginning to see what can we make out of all this data and how can we benefit in terms of putting it all together and making sense of it. Until we meet next time to continue this discussion, this is Al Fadi. God bless you.